solidarity and safe and affordable housing and all the things that we actually need to keep people safe in our communities. I'm just going to skip over a couple because there's so many here and I don't want to take too much time, but another principle that they articulated is amplify and echo women's voices, the women inside, and they're working with women here, but it goes for the men as well. Honor the voices of the women and men inside in all the work we do. We must avoid the construction of strategies or tactics which bypass the experiences and opinions of imprisoned and formerly imprisoned people. Theirs is the first voice of authority in effective anti-prison work. Another principle is contextualizing the role of the victim, and that our society likes to think very much about dividing people into boxes of people who are victims and people who are offenders, and in fact those categories are not at all real in terms of, like, people's experiences are people who are labeled as offenders are people who've had much harm done to them in their life, often by very overt forms of state violence. And then the final one, which I think is the most important and I try to think about a lot in my work, is promote revolutionary reforms. There's a lot of talk about reform right now. There's a lot of litigation going on. There's a case going on right now about solitary confinement that people might know about, segregation. And that's positive. I'm someone who's been advocating for a long time that we need to challenge some of these things in court, but there's a real concern that if our reforms are about making prisons better and more humane, that we have actually won this little tiny battle of sorts in the court, but lost anything that matters. And we've kind of entrenched and legitimized carceral institutions. So we want to think about, really carefully how we do that work. And I'm speaking to myself there. I want to close by, if there's a few more minutes, just by reading a poem by an amazing poet, spoken word artist that some of you may know, Elle Jones, who is out in Nova Scotia now, but originally from Winnipeg. She speaks really, I want to read it because she speaks so eloquently and connecting the dots between the injustice and inequality of prison and the injustice and inequality that goes on out here in the free world, that really connects to why we have people in prison. And the poem was written in 2015, and I won't be able to do it justice because it's Elle's words, and I've heard her speak these words, and they're her words, so I'm just going to try to do my best to give you those words, and then find her stuff online. You can find YouTube videos of her speaking her own words, and it's amazing. So this is Women in Prison by Elle Jones. Because it's 2015, and there's women in the cabinet, but that might not seem adequate to women in the custody of the state. It might not seem that late for Black women imprisoned at ever-rising rates, positioned by the color of her skin to be a criminal by definition. Or it might just seem too soon for Indigenous teen girls in Saskatoon, kicked out of school in the afternoon. At night she's trafficked on the streets and arrested as suspicious. Should we measure if our progress is finished by the number of women ministers, or maybe it should be the number of women prisoners? Perhaps we should consider the condition of women denied tampons or conditioner, or something even simpler like extra squares of toilet paper. Her body on camera so demeaning. In addition, her visitors can be turned away for no particular reason. So pardon me if I save my celebrations for at least another season, because we've come a long way, baby sounds a lot more sinister if you're a mother behind bars having her baby seized without her signature. And then she's punished for grieving. We might not think then that we've achieved gender equality so easily. Just ask Renee Ackaby. Or you could, if she'd ever be allowed to be freed. Because Indigenous women get labeled a social disease, would you believe that men who murder women are given regular sentences, but women in prison for non-violent crimes end up as dangerous offenders? When it was prison that created all their violent acts? Or let me go back to the fact that 80 to 90% of women in prison are victims of physical and sexual abuse, and the men who commit violence against them remain on the loose. Yet we take young girls and place them into custody as youths, and we deliver them straight from care to adult institutions. And maybe that only seems like a solution compared to the execution of Tina Fontaine, seen by police in the company of her killer. only for her body to be found a week later in the Red River? Does it make you shiver to think that the state would rather pay to hold women in jail than to pay half the cost to house and educate? And so many women become lost, but let's debate whether Sophie Trudeau should be granted a staff, while women who need mental health care end up with an epitaph. Can we grapple with the fact that Ashley Smith was imprisoned only for throwing apples, and in her battle with mental illness, she was held in solitary confinement in shackles until she strangled herself with her sheets? But nobody beats down the doors for women once they're serving time. The guards who watched her die for 45 minutes, but it was decided not to be a crime, and the records were sealed. A publication ban in place against revealing, never mind cracking the glass ceiling. It's a cell of glass walls when you're on suicide watch, with no chance of healing. And most women are in prison for crimes of poverty, like stealing, or because they had a boyfriend who's dealing. And black women just get convicted because we're seen not to have feelings. We're just assumed to be more guilty at every point in the proceedings. And it's so hard for women without money to get the help that they are needing, which is why there's so many women in the cells with cuts on their arms bleeding. And there's bruised women appealing their sentence because they murdered their abuser, and all people will say is, why didn't she leave sooner? Trans women housed with the men because her birth certificate doesn't prove her gender. And let's remember, there's still sex workers in the back of the cruiser. And when the treatment facility for women isn't funded, is it any wonder that users cycle in and out of jail when all the systems failed her? We ignore women's pain and blame it on her behavior, and women are placed in provincial facilities that are overcrowded. It's hard for the women to count when they're surrounded by men. Women pray for longer sentences just to get federal housing. Shouldn't we be doubting that so much progress has been made when so many women aren't waving but drowning? And we are rounding up refugee women for not having papers. It's ironic that Canada has web pages for Americans who want to come to Canada. If the election doesn't go their way, but women from third world countries are deported without wages, as if nannies and cleaners are really a danger. To the same society that won't charge women's rapists but spends millions of dollars locking up blacks and natives. And please don't think that prison makes her safer when male guards are allowed to see her naked. Have we forgotten Kingston, where the women were degraded? We refuse to believe women when they give their statements, but when they won't testify against gangs, they end up with prison placements. And we put women away for misrepresenting a few welfare payments. Black women working for corrections in conditions like enslavement, making $5 less a day with 9 hours on the clock. Native women in prison sew blankets in sweatshops for the same military that gave their ancestors smallpox. And after work, they go back to the range, and then the doors are locked. Oh, tell me again how inequality has dropped. If you've ever mopped a cell with your face cloth, you know it never stopped. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. Our next speaker